Alright, so let's get started. Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel that is UPSC Geek by NRG. Today we are going to delve into the intellectual legacy of one of the most towering figure in 19th century political sphere, that is none other than the John Stuart Mill, the one you can see in the figure. Okay, so let me give you a brief description about him. So born in 1806, Mill was a British philosopher, economist, and political theorist whose ideas have had a profound impact on ethics, politics, and concept of liberty. In his seminal work that is On Liberty, Mill passionately advocated for individual freedoms, arguing that society should allow maximum personal freedom as long as it doesn't harm others. Additionally, his influential work that is on utilitarianism explored the ethical principle that actions should maximize overall happiness. Mill's thought on liberty, utilitarianism, and representative government continue to shape discussion on individual rights and role of state. So, without any further ado, let's unravel the intellectual richness of John Stuart Mill and explore the enduring relevance of his ideas. Okay, to give you or bring a interesting fact about J.S. Mill to all of you, if this particular personality wouldn't have been existed in 19th century British political sphere, today we might not have the unlimited franchise right that we have today, that is the right to vote for everyone, right? He is the first one to propound or give the idea of right to vote for women, right? So this is how important it becomes for all of us to get to know the political idea of J.S. Mill. So let's get started. But before starting, I would love to share with you all that I am getting inundated with several requests and feedback about PDFs and etc. So I will be sharing all the PDFs related to this particular political lecture series in my Telegram channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. You can find the link in the description and feel free to join the Telegram channel where I will be sharing all the PDFs and all the relevant and pertinent resources related to all my lectures on YouTube. Okay, so with this, let's get started with JS Mill. Okay, so the table of content will look like this. We will be basically starting with introduction, that is life and time of Mill. Then we will see his seminal and influential works like On Liberty, Utilitarianism, and etc. We will see his perspective on liberty, what he had to say about liberty, then on representative government, then Mill on rights of women. These are the few most important political perspective by J.S. Mill. Then we will see overall criticism, okay, of J.S. Mill. Then we will end this lecture by this series of lecture with a interesting conclusion which will give you a balanced perspective on Mill, right? So let's get started with the first part, that is introduction, life and time of J.S. Mill. So as I have already told you that J.S. Mill was born in London, right? London in on 20th May 1806, right? 1806, 20th May. Not so important for our political science PSIR exam basically, but we just have to have a idea, because as the greatest of all, Mr. Lasky says that every child, every thinker is a child of his life and his time, right? Basically his time. Every thinker is a child of his time, and in order to understand that particular thinker, we have to understand his background, right? His background, what led him to shape his perspective, the particular situation, right? As in case of Hobbes, it was Puritan revolution. In case of Locke, it was a kind of glorious revolution which had a lasting impact on whom, the respective thinkers, right? So while understanding J.S. Mill also, we will get to know that he is somewhere standing on the crossroad of several evolving perspectives, right? Capitalism, right? Socialism, and etc., right? And this will have a kind of inconsistent influence on J.S. Mill, and later he is also criticized on the basis that J.S. Mill, though he is considered as the prophet of liberalism, he is also a prophet of anti-liberalism, or he is one of the most inconsistent thinker and etc. Right? So this is why it becomes very important for us, that is each and every one of us, to know the background from where that particular thinker is coming, right? So he was the eldest son of J.S. Mill, right? J.S. Mill, he was a friend of Bentham, right? And they were one of the most important propounder of utilitarianism school of ethics, right? So we will see in brief the Bentham's idea on utilitarianism as well, which shaped J.S. Mill perspective on utilitarianism, right? And Harriet Burrow Mill, okay, who was his mother. Outwardly, his life was not eventful. He was educated by his father and never attended school, right? He was attended by his father and he never attended any school. One more interesting fact is here is that J.S. Mill was one of the serving officer. He was one of the serving officer during the time of British East India Company, right? He was an employee of East India Company in Britain, right? So this will also help, like this James Mill himself in the office of East India Company got an opportunity for J.S. Mill as well to serve in the office of East India Company, right? And his experience with East India Company will shape his perspective on labors, right? And hence he will propound the idea of freedom of individuals, or freedom of laborers and etc., who were kind of bounded by the British employees or the British colonial masters in colonies like India, Africa and etc., right? India, Africa and etc. So this is how important it becomes for us to know the background. So his father J.S. Mill was a serving officer in East India Company. He was educated by his father and he never got an opportunity to go to the school. Okay, his education did not include any children's books or toys. For he started to learn Greek at the age of 4 and Latin at the age of 8. J.S. Mill ने बहुत ही early of his life he has started to learn Greek and Latin philosophies. Like he started reading Greek and Latin authors like Plato, right? Aristotle and etc. By the time he was 10, he had read many of Plato's dialogue, logic and history, right? He has kind of mastered the works of Plato just by the time he was 10 years old, right? And this will also kind of shape his personality. Why? Because he did not get to experience whatever his peers that were who were the children of like 4 to age and etc., 4 to 8 of their age. They basically get to have a social experience, right, through playing, through engaging with each other in very social manner. He was not engaged, or he was not let experience his childhood upbringing or fostering, right? And this will also kind of have very negative influence on J.S. Mill, right? Because in his perspective on liberty, he will propound the idea of individual freedom, right? Individual freedom, which he was not let experience because of his father. His father had a very kind of grave limitations and control on J.S. Mill, which kind of impacted his personality, right? So this is what is the background or life and times of Mill looks like, right? So in 1823, at the age of 17 years, he became the clerk, right? He became the clerk in the East India Company just as at the age of 17, right? Where his father was a high official and worked there until 1858. Mill got an opportunity to sit in Parliament from 1866 to 1868, right? And since he got an opportunity to sit in the Parliament, he has propounded the very important idea on liberty, the freedom of speech and expression, the right to vote for women, and etc. As parliamentarian, he could not stick to his radical party, and even many a time displeased party bosses by speaking against party line. He never kind of conformed to the ideas which was a baseline for his radical party to which he belonged, right? He kind of had sometimes a against perspective as well, against idea which was not aligning with the line of ideas which was kind of propounded by the radical party. Though his party was a radical party, they never supported the universal franchise, the idea which we have today, that is universal adult franchise. Everyone who is above certain age shall possess a right to vote, right? Basically the trend during the time of 19th century was in Britain was a limited franchise, and this did not supported by the J.S. Mill, and he kind of propounded the idea of what a franchise should be kind of inclusive, and even many a time displaced by party bosses by speaking against party line. In parliament, he stood for the protection of the interest of the laboring classes, women's suffrage, and land reforms in Ireland, right? So this is how his life looks like, right? So let's see some of his most important work. He was a prolific writer. He was a very prolific writer, let me tell you. He used to read, like just now we have seen how since very early of his age he started reading, and already done with most of one of the most prominent and stalwart figure, that is Plato, right? He has already done when he was 10 with almost all of the dialogues and important works of Plato, and which also shaped his interest in writing, and hence he became one of the most prolific writer, and he wrote on various branches of knowledge, right? We have already seen the different branches of knowledge like politics. He wrote on politics, he wrote on ethics, etc., right, with equal mastery. Some of his important works are System of Logic, right? This is the probably the first book he has ever written. Then the second is Principle of Political Economy. It was basically his perspective on free market economy, right? Free market economy or laissez-faire economy, right? Which was the basic idea behind Adam Smith economic theory, right? So he basically kind of given his perspective on laissez-faire idea of political economy, right? That individuals should have their right to property, and hence this will also kind of lead to the idea of J.S. Mill being a possessive individualism, right? Though he was the propounder of natural right, he will only advocate the idea of right to property, and hence he also comes to be regarded as an what prophet of possessive individualism, right? So this is the idea, a just brief idea that was given by J.S. Mill in the work that is Principle of Political Economy. Then we will be seeing one of the most important, that is Mill on Liberty, from his one of the most important or magnum opus, that is On Liberty, very important, which also shaped his idea on representative government, right? Then the fourth work is Utilitarianism, and fifth work is Women's Suffrage, where he basically propounds the idea of the suffrage rights for women, right? A very important lady by name Harriet, right? She was a kind of widow woman, okay, widow woman with whom Mill will end up marrying later. She influenced Mill on writing this particular work, right? Just looking and taking a consideration of Harriet, Mill also got the idea of advocating for right to women's suffrage, right? So Harriet plays a very important role in J.S. Mill life, and she also becomes a wife of J.S. Mill in later period of time, right? So this is the kind of works of J.S. Mill. So the three most important books that needs to be kept in mind is that On Liberty, Utilitarianism, and Women's Suffrage. And in among this, On Liberty is very important, which can be considered as an magnum opus by J.S. Mill. Magnum opus by J.S. Mill, right? Because his idea on liberty will go on and shape many of his perspective on what, on democracy, on idea of liberty, freedom of speech and expression, and etc. Right? So this was a kind of anthologies of his works which J.S. Mill has written in his life and time. Okay, so this is how a particular thinker will introduce to J.S. Mill, right? If there is anyone who is liberal, it is Mill, right? Basically, John Locke is known as father of liberalism, right? As we have already seen in the previous lecture. If you guys haven't watched the previous one, go and watch that, the Locke series, because these are some of the kind of string of thinkers, right? A string of thinkers whose ideas were kind of influenced by their predecessors. And if you don't kind of have an idea of what their predecessors were and how they articulated about certain concept, you will not be able to understand the influence they had on the later pearl of thinkers, right? So in order to understand any theory effectively, we have to understand that particular concept in very holistic terms, right? So let's say the idea of liberty, which was propounded by James Mill, it was also propounded by whom? Rousseau, right? It was also propounded by whom? It was also propounded by Locke. It was also propounded by Hobbes, right? Where if one have a negative concept on human nature which shaped their perspective on liberty, Locke had a kind of positive perspective that human beings are kind of civil, social, and they have the ability to rule themselves, and he propounded a very positive notion on liberty, right? Whereas Rousseau somewhere had a very conflicting or balanced idea, right? So this line or string of thinkers will shape the J.S. Mill ideas. So in order to understand any theory comprehensively and holistically, we have to understand and have the idea about their predecessors as well, whom basically were influenced by their respective predecessors, right? Predecessors ideas, right? So this was the idea. So as we know that Locke is known as father of liberalism, as he gives the theory of natural rights, yet he has given the elaborate theory on right to property, right? We have seen how Locke, though despite being known as father of liberalism and one of the very influential propounder on natural right, he has given the elaborate theory on, that is, right to property, and he has not elaborated on others' rights like right to property, or right to liberty, or right to freedom of speech and expression, and etc., which is also very important part of natural rights, right? Being a human, we are social animals, and in order to engage effectively in any social activity, we need to have certain rights, right? Like right to speech expression, life, security, and etc., right? So despite being a father of liberalism, Locke basically has propounded elaborately only on the idea of right to property, and he has not talked about the other social or natural rights, which becomes very important for our human existence, right? And hence he is called as the scholar of only possessive individualism. Why? Because he has only propounded the idea on right to property and not on any other rights. It would be wrong to limit liberalism as just the justification of capitalism, right? So as we know that how Locke is Locke is like infamously known as the prophet of capitalist class, or the thinker of the capitalist class. Why? Because he only talked about right to property and not on any other right? So liberalism is so here basically liberalism is not just about the right to property. It is about freedom of speech, expression, freedom to form association, freedom from customs, traditions, and so on, right? So this all freedoms and rights, they kind of constitute a social life of human beings, right? So uh, freedom is not only a kind of right, but it becomes very important right for human existence, right? This is the idea which will be propounded by whom? The Mill, right? And hence freedom or liberty or liberalism is not kind of limited only to property, but all such rights like freedom of speech, expression, to form association, free from customs, traditions, and all the foundations of the society, right? So this is how the Locke's idea is being considered here by Mill, right? So it was Mill who was the first person to give the theory of liberty found in liberalism, right? So Mill here, he becomes the first one to give the idea on liberty, to give the very elaborate idea on liberty, right? So in his book that is on liberty, he has given the extensive idea of liberty. Mill is also known as champion of democracy. Mill was also the champion of rights of women, and Mill was utilitarian, right? Why utilitarian? Because utilitarian propounds the idea of greatest happiness of what? Greatest number, greatest happiness of greatest number. And since because of his idea on liberty, which kind of free individual from the foundation of society, he propounds the idea of utilitarian. He supports the idea of utilitarian, that is greatest happiness of greatest number. That is why he is known as champion of democracy, champion of rights of women, and a kind of great propounder of utilitarianism, right? So this is how the life of Mill looks like, right, against Locke. So now let's see one of the most profound allegation that is being imposed on Mill, which says that is Mill a inconsistent thinker, right? Is Mill a inconsistent thinker? What does this term inconsistent thinker means? Inconsistent thinker is basically says that there is no consistency in his ideas. If in one side he is propounding the idea of democracy, on the other side he will also be on the side of socialism, right? And hence there is no consistency in the ideas, right? So is Mill a inconsistent thinker? So this will also somewhere give you a glimpse of entire idea of Mill, right? Why we are doing this? What is the importance of doing this particular slide? That is Mill an inconsistent thinker, right? The importance here is that it will give you an entire glimpse of what Mills look like, right? What is the idea of Mill will look like, right? So in his political theory, liberalism made a transition from laissez-faire to an active role for the state, from a negative to a positive conception of liberty, and from an atomistic to more social conception of individuality, right? So it is a kind of transition, right? His political theory is kind of transition from laissez-faire, that is free market economy, to a active role of state, right? That is positive liberty, where state enters in order to promote the welfare among the citizens, from a negative to positive conception of, from negative to positive conception of liberty, and from atomistic nature of man. What is atomistic nature of man? Atomistic nature of man is basically man being a self-centered entity. He is only concerned about the self-interest of the individual and not of the society, right? To a more social conception of individuality, which basically propounds the idea that man is not only concerned about the self-interest of the self, but he is also concerned about the welfare of the others, or the self-interest of the others in the society. So this is a kind of transition that is being observed in the ideas of Mill, right? So it is not confounded to or hemmed by any particular idea, that is a complete or original notion of liberalism, that is laissez-faire or negative state and etc. It is kind of transition from negative to positive conception of liberty, more from more atomistic nature to more social conception of individuality, right? So this is a kind of basis upon which the ideas of Mill is being built upon, right? So while J.S. Mill was a liberal, he could also be regarded at the same time as a reluctant democrat, right? As we all know that Mill was a great liberal. Why? Because he propounds the idea for the first time on liberty, right? But at the same time he can also be regarded as a reluctant democrat. Why? Because of, again, his perspective on human nature, that is sometimes when it comes to, he will give the idea of self regarding action and others regarding actions, right? So when it comes to self regarding action, man can have complete freedom, but when it comes to others regarding action, where the individual action will have an impact on the other's life as well, there the state has to interfere, right? So in this he is kind of propounding the idea of what? Propounding the idea of being a reluctant democrat, where he is not kind of propounding the complete notion of freedom, right? So a pluralist, a cooperative, socialist, and elitist, and importantly a feminist, right? So we can see a concoction of all the ideas, concoction of all. On the one hand, he is propounding the idea of liberalism, but at the same time, he is also being a reluctant democrat. On the one hand, if he is pluralist, who will kind of talk about the inception of plural cultures and ideas, he is also a cooperative socialist, where state will kind of have a direct control over the life of individuals, and elitist, and importantly a feminist, right? So this is a kind of brief about Mill. If he is known as champion of liberty, he is also known as prophet of empty liberty, right? We will see one of the most important criticism, and the questions related to that has been asked several times, that is Mill is the prophet of empty liberty, right? Which will say that Mill is a prophet of empty liberty, which is related to his idea basically on liberty. So Ernest Barker, one of the thinker, right, he will criticize Mill by saying that Mill is a prophet of empty liberty, right? So we will see this particular criticism, and we will do a complete analysis of this and assessment as well. So while dealing that particular lecture, we will do this particular part in depth, right? So this is what inconsistency we can see in Mill's idea, that says that he is known as champion of liberty, but he is also known as the champion of or the prophet of empty liberty. Mill is a utilitarian who destroyed utilitarianism, right? So as utilitarian was an original idea of Bentham, which basically talks about very limited concept of utilitarianism, Mill kind of comes into the sphere of utilitarianism, and he completely revolutionizes the idea of utilitarianism, which gives more social notion of utilitarianism, that is greatest happiness of greatest number. That is why he kind of alleged with the idea that he is a utilitarian who destroy utilitarianism, which is more original notion of utilitarianism, which is a more Benthamite notion of utilitarianism. So while doing a utilitarian by Bentham, in the next lecture, that is 31, we will be dealing this concept in very comprehensive manner, right? So this is a kind of number of inconsistencies that we can see in his idea. That just to give you a summary, if he is a kind of a liberal, he is also a propounder of a reluctant democracy, right? If he is a pluralist, he is also a kind of propounder of socialist. If he is an elitist, he is also a feminist, right? If he is a champion of liberty, he is also a prophet of empty liberty. If he is the advocate of utilitarian, he is also alleged with someone who completely destroys utilitarianism by Bentham, right? So this is what a inconsistency we can see in the idea of Mill, right? So why? But is that particular allegation that Mill is an inconsistent thinker has any basis? Let's see why. He is inconsistent because of the times, right? He stands at the crossroad of negative and positive liberty. Hence, we observe that inconsistencies, right? So, as we have seen his ideas, what kind of transition, right? Was kind of transition from negative liberty, that is the idea of laissez-faire, to more positive liberty or welfare state, right? Welfare state, where the state interferes in the life of the people or society in order to promote welfare among them also, right? So here J.S. Mill kind of stands at the crossroad of a transition from negative liberty to positive liberty, and hence we can see a inconsistency or kind of evolution, right? Here inconsistency is very negative term. Here you can positively conclude this idea is that it is not inconsistency, but we can see a evolution from negative liberty to positive liberty in Mill's idea. However, the significance of thinker is evaluated not on the basis of how much logically consistent he is, but how relevant the idea is in his time, right? So this is what explicits the significance of thinker, not about his consistency or him being a logically consistent, but how pertinent or how relevant is his idea during his times, basically signifies the significance of that particular thinker, right? So this is how we can decide whether Mill was a consistent thinker or not, right? So it is not basically the basis to evaluate whether the thinker was consistent or not, but it is basically about the relevance of his idea that was prevalent or pertinent to his time, that basically signifies the importance of that particular thinker. And nobody can deny or refute the idea that J.S. Mill was one of the most important political stalwart of his time, right? Whose idea on liberty, whose idea on the suffrage for women and etc. were one of the most revolutionary idea during his time, right? So this is what is the brief glimpse about J.S. Mill or introduction about the J.S. Mill. So we are almost done with the today's lecture. Now you guys can check your progress by answering these tidbits of questions like J.S. Mill was not a the first option is champion of democracy, champion of women's right, utilitarian, or a socialist, right? So just try having a relevance or a relevant idea and try answering this question in the comment section. I will have a look of it and come back with a response, right? There is one more question. The first question is this. There is one more question. Who is regarded as the father of liberalism? A is Locke, B is Mill, C is Bentham, and D is Green. So right. So try answering these questions in the comment section. I will have a look at it and come back with a positive feedback, right? So thank you for constant feedback, aspirants, that I am inundated with, and I am really very positively motivated in order to sustain and continue this journey of teaching and learning, right? So here I am teaching you all to make political science a easy take for all of you, so that you can score a really good marks. This is from my own personal experience in PSIR optional exam. This is not about the mastering the subject, that is just a one part, but it is how effectively and confidently you are attempting any answer, right? So I am kind of formulating my lecture and the content of the lecture as per the idea that you guys will have that notion of confidence while attempting any answer, right? So that is why the lecture is very holistically prepared, so that it will it will give you a holistic idea on several concepts so that you guys can interlink and attempt the answer in your PSIR exam. With this, thank you so much. Also ensure to show your love to our YouTube channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG, and also like the video. And thank you people.